Greetings and salutations, Internet-essence. It is I, Wolfphototech, and here we are with another delightful video. I've already made this video a few times already. The first time I made it, and it was over an hour long, and I used the 4K mode, and it took like 8 hours to upload, and then another 2 hours to process. And there was an error in it where it would skip repeatedly in a spot. So second time I did the same thing again. Said screw it. I'm not doing the 4K mode, because in the case of Call of Cthulhu, I can actually go into pretty good detail on various mechanics and give some advice, which then results in really long videos, which really long upload times at 4K. So this is only in 1080p, 60 frames per second. So, okay, yeah, indeed. But anyways, this is the Investigator's Handbook for Call of Cthulhu 7th edition. This is actually the actual most popular TTRPG, tabletop role-playing game in the world. It's more popular than Dungeons & Dragons in most of Europe, pretty much all of Asia, South America, and Africa. Dungeons & Dragons, I think, is only #1 in the United States, Canada, and I think the United Kingdom and a few other places in Europe. Pretty much everywhere else, it's Call of Cthulhu, or say in Germany, The Dark Eye, which I happen to have over there. And then also some various TTRPGs in Japan. In Asia and South America, there is a lot of local TTRPGs, like Sword World 2.5, which is the top TTRPG in Japan, and there's numerous other TTRPGs in South America that are far more popular than Dungeons & Dragons and even Call of Cthulhu. But Call of Cthulhu is #1 in the sense of it's the top Western TTRPG that's globally sold and produced. So it's #1 globally, but regionally that gets a little touchy there, because it doesn't match up to Sword World in Japan. Although Call of Cthulhu is very popular in Japan, it's just the #1 Western TTRPG, which probably I think it ranks around like 6th place or something. I haven't checked in a long time, but okay. So anyways, this book is around 280 pages. Comes with 2 ribbons. Minor note on the ribbons. It's nice to have a ribbon in a book, or even 2 ribbons, or 3 or 4. However, the ribbons are actually just cheap made ribbons. So you have the problem of, instead of them double cross-hatching the tips for strength, it's just a loose end that's somewhat tightly bound together. But all it takes is something to catch the tip of the ribbon, and the one string that goes left to right on there gets hooked on something or nicks, and it pulls apart, and you end up with something like this, with the tips frayed. And then a string comes off, and then it just starts unraveling. So it's nice to have ribbons, but the ribbons are not top quality. Side note, this book, not a side note, other detail is that this book MSRP is for $49.95, and it is a Origins Award Hall of Fame system. It's important note, in comparison to, say, Dungeons & Dragons or Pathfinder, unlike those systems for players, this is truly the one book you need. I mean, just the one book you need. If you're playing a 1920s or modern era investigator, this is the book you buy. This is the only real book you need to buy. And once you have it, you don't have to buy any other books as a player. It's wonderful. All your combinations are in this book. Now, if you want to play medieval Call of Cthulhu, Dark Age Call of Cthulhu, or Cthulhu Invictus, or End Time setting, or Pulp Cthulhu, you will have to buy other books specifically for those. But those are special campaign settings with special extra rules and mechanics built on top with new technologies and systems added in, specifically for those campaign settings. However, entirely, all you need as a player, first and foremost, is this book right here to play the vast majority of Call of Cthulhu scenarios and have the vast majority of the options for Call of Cthulhu. Now, I was also noting that a good chunk of this book actually is largely just getting into the understanding of what a horror investigative mystery game is. Nice page for the title and all the credits. You got a photo of H.P. Lovecraft. So there's about 280 pages. About 10 pages in the back are basically just thanking people on Kickstarter for their contributions. And then about another 100 pages is basically just history lessons on the 1920s and referencing culture and other events around in the 1920s, just before and just after, as well as a overall history of the United States running from the late 1800s all the way up to 2000s. So there's a history book inside this book, but also, as I would turn the page, there's also a story from H.P. Lovecraft in this book. Please note that some people have issue with H.P. Lovecraft as they claim he's an artist, a racist, or a bigot, or a sexist. It's important to note that he grew up in a quasi-wealthy family in an era where the arisms were really common. And it's also important to note that there was mental illness in his family when he was growing up. So he actually has technically what's called xenophobia, not the other phobias or stuff like that. He just has the fear of something that is different from him, because he lived a relatively sheltered life and he was paranoid of like things that are just not the same as him. So that leaks through in his stories. It makes total sense what he writes. He writes horror. He was terrified of things that are uncomprehendable and that are inherently different from him and the people like him at the time. So he had struggles with that. I do believe, if I remember correctly, that later on in his life he actually married a Jewish woman, and he actually became friends with an African American guy. So he got over it over time. It's just he was set up in a rough position starting out mental illness wise. Now onto the table of contents. It's you got your introduction, chapter 1, which is page 10 to page 15. You got chapter 2, which is the Dunwich Horror, which is page 18 to page 39. The Dunwich Horror is a story by H.P. Lovecraft. The reason why it's probably in this book is to give people a good feeling of what a Call of Cthulhu scenario or adventure is like. And it actually is a pretty good story, as it does hit many of the key points in the feel and flow of a Call of Cthulhu adventure. And then we have at chapter 3, which is page 40 to 65, which is character creation. And then after that is chapter 4, which is page 66 to 69, which is character occupations. Important to note that character occupations are largely like your background in Pathfinder 2nd Edition or Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition. With the slight exception that it you sprinkle a bit of your class, first level of your class, into it. But backgrounds are literally just the starting point for your character. That help occupations are the starting point for your character that set up your background going forward. And set your skills, but your skills can evolve and change as you play Call of Cthulhu, because Call of Cthulhu is built on the BRP system, the basic roleplay system, and it is a do thing. If you succeed at it, you get better at it kind of thing. Much like Elder Scrolls Skyrim, if you enjoy the Elder Scrolls franchise, the mechanic of using an ability repeatedly and successfully hitting something or jumping or running really fast or taking hits and healing back, you improve your stats. That's basically how Call of Cthulhu is, as well as RuneQuest. So there you go. Elder Scrolls franchise is not based on Dungeons and Dragons. It's based on RuneQuest and Call of Cthulhu. Alrighty. And then we go on to chapter 5, which is skills. It explains your fighting brawl skill, and it explains psychology and psychoanalysis, and it explains listening skill and spot hidden, and etc., etc. And then you go on to chapter 6, which is Investigator Organizations. By the way, chapter 5 goes from page 94 to 102. This section right here that I just went past, by the way, is basically the player section of the book, where all the stuff you really need to play Call of Cthulhu as a player, to build a character and run your character in-game, is pretty much in this section right here. With the exception of this section right here, which is the reference section, which I'll get to in a moment. The reference section has all the tables where all the shopping is done. So chapter 6 is the Investigator Organizations. Investigator Organizations is a convenient way for the game master or keeper of arcane lore can tie a group of characters together in an organization so they can keep going through multiple scenarios. Please note that in Call of Cthulhu, the system is slightly more deadly if you are just pro-combat as a player. It's a system that favors more like diplomacy and clever thinking, like using science and various other tricks to win combat situations or beat them before they even start. But you can win as a player in combat if you play smart and set yourself up for them. And the other thing with Call of Cthulhu is combat ranges anywhere from non-existent to incredibly constant. And you can have anywhere from very murder mystery, typical detective noir stuff, all the way to horror movie monster stuff in Call of Cthulhu. So it's important to keep that in mind. And then you have chapter 7 up here, which is pages 146 to 159, which basically is just like, hey, you're playing an investigator. These are the concepts and what you need to keep in mind when you are playing as an investigator. Like, how do you find out about information? Useful sources of information. You know, like go to the newspaper, go to the library, go to the town halls, check out like past issues of the local town newspaper. Believe it or not, back in the 1920s, every town has basically had their own newspaper for the most part. If you had a population of over 250 people to 1,000 people in a town, they literally had their own printing press in town that printed their own newspapers, and it was an independent news organization dedicated to the town and the neighboring areas in general. Yes, that's very interesting indeed. Also, if you ever look at reference section and look at prices for stuff, it is really fascinating how inflation has screwed everyone up pretty badly. But anyways, on to chapter 8, which is page 60 to 208, 202. That is basically the Roaring Twenties. It's basically a history lesson of what happened in the 1920s, prohibition, gangsters, discoveries of new technology, the rise of movies and the movie serials and stuff like that. I actually have on my other YouTube channel a series of reviews from classic movies from the 1920s and 1930s. I was originally planning on moving that over to another channel, and at some point I might actually do that. But anyways, continuing on. Chapter 9 is player advice. It's just generally like if you're an entirely new player, there's advice there on how to play Call of Cthulhu for you. Alrighty? You get that in the Life as an Investigator in Chapter 7. You get bits of that throughout Chapter 3, Chapter 4, and Chapter 5, as well as Chapter 6 in advice. In the case of the Call of Cthulhu Players Investigator's Handbook, they have a propensity to repeat advice, slightly worded differently each time. Not conflicting, but worded in a slightly different manner each time, as to make it easier for some people to understand it. Because sometimes when you get an explanation one way, it's like, I'm not entirely sure or what they meant by pithy or something like that. But when it comes back around in a slightly different way, where they tell you a story about a character, it might actually click in. Chapter 10 is all references. There's a mixture of a bit of history at the very beginning, a timeline of the natural world, as well as speeds and distances and different prices for books, clothing, houses, cars, boats, aircraft, all kinds of stuff. And it's really shocking when you could buy a car for $500 that's brand new. You know. But anyways, and then they have, as I said, there's weapons tables, there's converting from previous editions. Call of Cthulhu is the most backwards compatible system ever in TTRPGs. Wizards of the Coast likes to say, "Oh, our next revision is backwards compatible. Our next thing is going to be backwards compatible." They've been saying that forever. They even said that, I think, with Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, with 4th edition and 3.5 and 3rd edition, and 3rd edition was backwards compatible with advanced and advanced 2nd edition and advanced that you do. It takes a lot of work to convert Dungeons & Dragons editions. Call of Cthulhu, it's dirt simple. It's like a few pages right there, just a few pages. So you got a beautiful piece of artwork. It's pretty dark overall, but that's the feel for Call of Cthulhu. You have another nice piece of double 2-page artwork for Chapter 1. Each chapter starts with a double page, each piece of artwork, chapter up here, the intro, what it is, and then there's a little excerpt from one of H.P. Lovecraft's stories. And it looks like H.P. Lovecraft got inserted into his story here. You get into the introduction. This is basically introduces you to the how to use this book, the examples of play, cooperation and competition, winners and losers, and so forth. So that's pretty simple. Right down here on the side right here, there's an example of play. It's referred to as a replay as far as the Japanese are concerned. And it's actually very popular in Japan to have literally novel books printed up. There are nothing but replays from a campaign or adventure from like various TTRPGs. It's just one of those fascinating things. The replay continues up to here. So you get a nice little example of play. What the game covers, what you need for the game. All you really need is like a D10, a D10, a D10s, a D4, a D6. got a D4, you got a D6. A D8 is useful, but more useful for dungeon game masters or the keeper of arcane lore. A D3, which is not shown here, is also very useful for players because you are going to roll a lot of D3s if you do a lot of melee attacks and you're a small character. A D12 is completely useless. As far as I know, that there's no use for D12s in Call of Cthulhu. They just don't use them. It goes over role-playing dice, reading the dice, how to read a D100. You roll a D10s and a D10, and you work it together. Dice roll variations. Over Discord, by the way, I just had people roll multiple D100s. Chapter 2 is the Dunwich Horror. A little quote from Dunwich Horror. Beautiful artwork of important scene where all the researchers or the party discovers where's Wilbur. And you go through the Dunwich Horror. You get an entire story in with your Call of Cthulhu Investigator's Handbook. I've said that before multiple times. So if you were to buy this story just alone, it would be like $9 in a book. You get a $9 story in your a $9 story that's probably worth $19 in your Investigator's Handbook. You get a double spread page. You know what? A thing I really hate is the pretty scientist lady is or librarian is stuck on the divide of the book. I have always had a thing for nerdy girls. This chapter is all about creating your character. These tags, or these pages from various books, are basically just operating advice, explaining various concepts, and giving you advice on mental space of what a 1920s character would be like. Okay? There's a simple step-by-step layout of a list of the basic steps of rolling your characteristics, determining your occupation. Your occupation is essentially your background. Think in terms of Pathfinder and Call of Cthulhu, except with a sprinkle of the early stuff off of your class. But it's just a starting point. It's not entirely, you're not entirely locked to it. Your character can freely grow from there. Step 3 is decide skills and allocate skill points from your occupation as well as your personal interests. Step 4 is create backstory. Step 5 is equip an investigator, like pick out your items and stuff like that. The money system for Call of Cthulhu is actually very dynamic and frees up people to like, oh, I have a boxer. Obviously, a boxer would have boxing shorts. He would have boxing gloves. He would have various weights to work out with. So it would make sense that he would have his boxing gloves with him and stuff like that. And there's really no charge to it. Keeper says, like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it's for your character to have that, and you go with it. So there's step 1, character generation. You roll for your... I have to take 5 seconds. There are 5 stats that are 3d6 times 5. And then there's 3 stats that are 2d6 plus 6 times 5. So we have strength, constitution, size. I forget size so easily because it's tucked down here in this little corner. Dexterity, appearance, intelligence, power, education, and you also have luck over here, which is a special one. It's actually technically I think it's supposedly a variant rule, but it's like stuck right there, and everyone just automatically uses luck in their game. But they're all these, with the exception of 3 of them, are a 3d6 times 5. The exceptions are size, intelligence, and education, which are 2d6 plus 6 times 5. You have a little section right here for age. As your character, when you start your character out in the adventure, you will be at a particular age when you start out, and from that age you modify some of your stats depending on how old you are. When you are young, there's not a really easy, simple answer to that, actually. Age is not 15 to 19. You're basically a young person. You deduct 5 points from strength and size, and deduct from education 5 points. And then you roll twice for luck and take the better of the two. And then the rest are like basically like deduct X amount of points from this short list of stats, pick any which one to reduce, divide it up however you want, and then make X number of education advancement rolls for your character to boost your education. This is replicating the fact that as people get older, after a certain point, their bodies start breaking down. They're not as fast or strong or durable as they used to be. But they gain in wisdom and knowledge of the world. They've learned and read all kinds of stuff. So there you go. Right here is basically what do the numbers mean. Low numbers are like you're really weak in that category. 50 is that average zone. Higher numbers like 80, 90, 99 is like you're exceptional. This happens to be, this one right here is a actual example of creating a character. There's a character named Amy who is creating a character named Harvey, who is a journalist. And it goes through the whole little story of her rolling out his stats and everything, and going through the thought process of, okay, I got this roll, so obviously I should go this route, etc. And it ends out here. You have the rest of the age table. Now, this is one of those slight problems with Call of Cthulhu, this book. There's actually 2 problems besides the ribbon thing. Sometimes stuff continues on from a page and it appears in a bottom little section under a box that's really easy to miss or mentally overlook. And then some of the charts are just foreshortened versions. So like table 1 damage and bonus, it goes from 2 to 204, which is ranges from a -2 on your damage bonus to a +1 d6 for your damage bonus and your size. Later on in the book, you actually come across another table just like that. That's a little bigger, and it actually has more levels in it. So there you go. As you are doing all your stats, you write in the half and fifth value of your stats. I'm going to get out Dr. Wendell. So when you're doing your character stats, the big box is your base number, the top box is your half, and the bottom is your 1/5 value. And the same thing applies for your skills. See? So there you go. And the half is hard, the 1/5 is extreme, or near impossible, as it might actually be like a 1 or something like that. 1s are typically always considered critical successes, and 100s on a D100 roll are always considered fails. So there you go. Other attributes, it talks about the damage bonus and build chart right here, but also there's a better version later on in the book. As I said, there's things that repeat through the book in slightly different with different levels of information added to them or lost. Hit points is con and size. You add them together and divide them by 10. You got your movement rate, which is basically a contest between your dexterity and strength, and whether they're higher or lower than size. So I know I gave that weird look, but it's kind of one of those weird things. You have to like read it once and read it second time and like, okay, that makes sense. And then as your character gets older, There's also a degradation of your movement. So if your character happens to be a move 7 character, but you decided for whatever strange reason to make him 80 years old, you're going to have a 2 movement. There is actually an equation here stating... there's actually an equation in here stating exactly how many yards your character can move based on that number. I think it's like multiplied by 10 or something like it's either multiplied by 5 or 10. And that's very telling because it's actually one of those really low value pieces of information other than the number, the move 7 or move 8, move 9. Because the move 7, move 8, move 9 works into the chase rules later on in the book. However, the actual distances, like, oh, you could run 35 feet, 35 yards, or 40 yards. That's something like, do we need to use that? No, not really. No. If you want to, like, use a map or something, you can. But that's like low value information right there. You don't really need it. On to the next points. Right over here, there's determining occupation. This is one of the other things in this book that's a little complicated, a little bit annoying. Besides the fact that they don't bolden like Constitution or size. So when you look at the page, you're like, where is that? There's that magic rule or something, and where is it? You can't really find it. Then you read through an entire paragraph, and then you all of a sudden come across, oh yeah, it's right there. But other thing is that, which comes in handy why you have these ribbons here, is that when you get into the occupations, you would need your stats for your education and your various other stats to determine how many points you get out. So you go you have to go all the way over here, many, many pages. By the way, this is a nice chart outlining it, and it actually has bigger and better versions of some of the charts from before. But you go all the way over here to the occupation. There's a list of all the occupations in this book. And say you wanted to be an acrobat. Your occupation skills for acrobat are as education times 2 plus dexterity times 2. So you go back, you look at your sheet, your scrap piece of paper, you multiply your education and dexterity times 2 each, and then you add them together, and that's how many points you get. You look at the instructions over here for that, and you look at the list of skills you can pick from over here, and you go on your sheet and you mark each one, and you put in your, you divide up all your numbers and add them to your sheet. And that is probably like the one seriously annoying thing when curating a character is the need to flip between this section and this section and look at your sheet. And then to not have all the features like size, con, magic points, or anything like that highlighted or boldened. I really hate to like highlight any of my stuff in my books, but hey, that's what it is. So you go from picking out your occupation to distributing your occupation skill points. And then over on to the next page, you got personal skill and skill points or personal interests. You basically take your intelligence, times that by 2, and divide it by everything or anything you want in the standard list of skills. So whatever's on your character sheet, you can pick from, with the exception of the Mythos skill. The Mythos skill is a forbidden skill you do not add points to. It's right there. That skill is strictly for the the game master or the keeper of arcane lore to tell you how many points you get from your adventures and your encounters to add to that. So there you go. So, yeah, you can divide that out. There's a good general rule that you don't want to spread. There's 2 general rules about spreading out your points. First, you don't want to take all your points and pile them into one area, because that turns you into a one-trick pony. And depending on the flow of the campaign, if your character is a master airplane pilot and a boat pilot, and you guys are walking through a woods, it's just like, you're lost in a woods that's traveling somewhere, and you don't have an airplane or a boat. You're not going to do much with that 99 skill. So you don't want to put everything into a few skills. You can only do that a few times, and then you have nothing to spread out everywhere else. You got weapons and firearm skills. It reminds you, hey, you might be interested in like putting a little bit into your fighting brawl and a little bit into firearms like handguns or something. I do also have to remind you, you should probably also look into when you allocate points, if you happen to be one of the few occupations that has dodge as a occupation skill, that you put a few more points into your dodge. Your dodge by default starts with half your dex. And dodge is actually one of the most important skills you can have in Call of Cthulhu. It actually is the basis of one of the few overpowered builds in Call of Cthulhu. And it's the lame overpowered build. Okay? Call of Cthulhu, you're not going to find a whole lot of YouTubers or posts or stuff talking about overpowered builds for Call of Cthulhu, because the system is counterbalanced so that if you dump tons of points into one area, you become really weak in other areas and you have to be concerned. But there's a few things you can choose from that can be power or skills and power builds. So this section right here goes through occupation. You have a little bit of information on your credit rating right here, and more information on credit rating over here. Basically, it is the means of determining how much money you have on you at all times, what's your base income as a character, what's your access level to money and credit, what's your status level to credit, and what stuff would you own before a campaign starts. Are you so rich that you actually own a house and multiple vehicles? Or are you just really poor and rent from an apartment or live on the streets? The credit rating answers those questions. There's then advice from here on about crafting backgrounds. This is about filling out your relationships between other people, what items are really important, like you have a cross or something else that is deeply significant to your character that you can use as a psychological means of reinforcing your character. You got character names, where you came from, etc. This is another one of those tables where I was talking about earlier. There was a table that was about credit rating and giving you basically a base outline of credit rating. Oh, here we go again with cash and assets, which is basically credit rating credit rating part B, where it goes through how much cash do you have on you, what level of assets you would have on you, and your spending level. The spending level is a really neat feature where if you have a high enough credit rating, say like you have like a credit rating somewhere around 50 to 89, and your spending level would be around $50. So it basically means that you can go to a store in the game and spend $50. Don't have to bother worrying about writing it down or doing the math, or you can spend $32 or $37 or $26 or $49. You don't have to worry about that because that's just in your spending limit, and you don't have to do math beyond, is it under $50? Yes, I buy it then. And you got it. It explains it in more details over here. You got information for like considering birthplace, gender of investigator, and etc. And then equipping your investigator, cash assets, and equipment right here. And then we go on to optional rules for character creation. either addenduming onto the base rules or entirely changing them. You also have this handy dandy chart right here of your full value, your half value, and your 1/5 value in strips. So if you're a person that's really bad at math and you can't figure out what's 1/5 of 50, you can look at this and like say, oh, it's 10. Half is 25. What's half of 42? 21. What's 1/5 of that? 8. And there you go. You have start over rule, modifying low rolls, choosing where to place scores. There's for variant rules or optional rules. Point buy system. So you get a lump of points, 460 points, and you can just redistribute them across your stats. It has a little bit of advice under there not to put certain things below certain points. The quick fire method, which is basically standard array for Call of Cthulhu, which is basically everything right here does the whole core of the game story. Then you have reaching the heights of people, where if you have done all your stats, you just your game master says roll an extra d10, okay? Whatever points, you get from that, you can divide up amongst your core stats to change it up. A good piece of advice that's always been stated is like take a few points and stick it into dexterity, because having a number that's not divisible by 10 or 5 is awesome. When it comes to dexterity, because that determines your initiative score in combat or interactions and makes it easier to organize you. Then you have optional rules here, a few more optional rules, such as starting skill value caps, which basically is my favorite rule, which is stipulating that no one can start with any skill that's greater than 75. You cap at 75 starting out, and that ensures that people don't dump all their stats into one area, and allows that they also spread them out a little bit. That also is important to note that you do not want to spread all your points out super drastically. You don't want a super flat character where you've taken 5 points, added to this, 5 to that, 5 to that, 5 to that, 5 to that, 5. Because then you end up with a situation where you're not at all exceptional at everything, at anything. And I had to look at the time there. Then you have an optional rule for experience packages. Sometimes you might want to like have your entire party, you start out from a particular point. Like they all were in the Great War as soldiers at one point in time. And you say like, you can add the war experience package to your character. Make the necessary adjustments. You move on from here. This right here is a beautiful table, as I said before, where it actually has a bigger version of the damage bonus, DB, and build table, which continues all the way up to over 524 total. That's handy dandy, just in case you get really heavy characters that go super high. Then you go into occupations. This section right here explains how to construct your own custom occupation, because in spite of the fact that they have a ton of options here, and I mean they have a ton of options, something here might not have exactly what you want. So you can create what you want with the basic rules of how to build occupations. I'm going to use Acrobat as a starting example here. I'll also use accountant as a starting example. The first two occupations. An accountant is either employed with a business or working as a freelance consultant with a portfolio of self-employed clients or businesses. Diligence and attention to detail means that most accountants can make good researchers, being able to support investigations through careful analysis of personal business transactions, financial statements, and other records. Occupation skill points. Education times 4. Credit rating. Their range is 30 to 70. So when you allocate out points, you're going to have to allocate points out between the range of 30 and 70. Suggested contacts, business associates, legal professions, financial sector, bankers, and other accountants. So when you are doing investigations as an accountant, you can say, like, go to the IRS or banks or other people in the financial sector and prod them for information. And given you may even know them personally because you have worked with them in the past, that you might have a means of acquiring key pieces of information as to where is Franklin Faulkner getting his wealth from. You can't seem to figure it out. And then you have down here skills. This is the list of skills in which you can use your occupation points on. There is some flexibility in this. It even states it earlier in the book that talking with your game master or keeper of arcane lore can modify this list. However, the number of items is important as to spread out your occupation skill points just enough so you don't concentrate them into too few areas. And for the accountant, it's accounting, law, library use, listen, persuade, spot hidden, and any 2 other skills as personal or era specializations, such as if you're playing in a modern era, you can use computers as an example to add into that list. And then I'm going to go with acrobat. Here's another occupation. Acrobats may be either amateur athletes competing in staged meets, possibly even the Olympics, or professional employed with entertainment sectors. Each example, circuses, carnivals, theatrical performances. Occupation skill points. Education ×2 plus dexterity ×2. This is important to note that some occupations give you, instead of just education, it might be education plus dexterity, or education plus strength, or education plus either strength ×2 or dexterity ×2 or appearance ×2. Different occupations have different skill sets or traits that they favor in people. And in the case of acrobat, it happens to be education and dexterity. Education seems to be the universal default or first thing that always pops in. Film star, incidentally, is education ×2 plus appearance ×2. But anyways, your credit rating will be 90 to 20. Your suggested contacts are amateur athletes, circles, sports writers, circuses, carnivals, and various other such places. And then your skills are climbing, dodge, jump, throw, spot hidden, swim, any 2 other skills as personal or era specialities. So there you go. And that's just 2 examples right there. There's 3 down here. Actor, we have stage actor and film star, and so forth. And you actually have a really nice selection like craftsperson, criminal, deprogrammer, dilettante, doctor of medicine, driver, editor, elected official, engineer, entertainer, explorer, firefighter, gambler, gentleman, gangster, hobo, drifter, hospital orderly, journalist, judge, labor assistant, lawyer, lumberjack, librarian, mechanic, military officer, mountain climber, musician, occultist, outdoorsman, nurse, parapsychologist, pharmacist, photographer, and it keeps on going. And then we get to Chapter 5, Skills. This chapter covers all the essential skills in which your character or players are going to be using in the game. Such as, here's the skill definitions, skill specializations. And various other combining skill rules and various other fun details like explaining ratios of probability here. It is important to note that skill specializations are subcategories of a skill. Say, like, if you have survival as a good example. There will be oftentimes when you have, say, something like a pilot. Example is pilot or survival, where you have the tag specialization. It means that you have to specialize in a subcategory of that. You cannot buy in general. So in the case of pilot, you have to either have piloting boats, piloting airplanes, piloting airships, etc. In the case of survival, it's like survival Arctic, survival mountains, survival forest, survival desert, survival ocean, survival city. So there you go. Each one of these skills has the basic explanation of what it's like or what it's used for, pushing roll examples, and a sample example of failing at a pushed roll. And then you have little bits of tags here and there. You also have some stuff that's like artillery uncommon, which means that if you are not military, and your game master, you ask your game master for artillery, your game master is going to ask you, why would you have artillery? So there you go. You go through here, there's drive auto right there for the 1920s, electrical repair for 1920s. All these tags in here are mostly for 1920 stuff because it needs to be defined more clearly as to what is electrical repair in the 1920s sense. More modern people can look that up easily. And you go through here. It is not super pressing that you read every single one of these. Just make sure to read the ones in which you actually are using. And it's one of those things where you can just kind of wing it a little bit. And you read some of them. Read the ones that you're going to use the most. Your game master reads some. The other players read some. And eventually you end up learning from each other what they're all used for. And then there's also optional rules right here, back here. Just about every chapter has optional rules at the end pertaining to stuff from that chapter. Like specialization transferable skills benefit. Say like if you had 50 in forest survival. Because you have 50 in forest survival, you can actually grant yourself 10 points in all the other survivals. Or any other survivals, right, automatically as free. You can also do the same thing with language and weapon skills. Like if you have 50 with handguns or 50 with shotguns and rifles, you can grant if your game master permits it, you can grant yourself an extra 10 and on top for all your other hand weapons, armed weapons. So here you go with another Investigator Organizations. As I said before, this gives you advice like, were you military? Were you secret society? Were you a government organization of some other form that ties everyone together? Are you a club? Are you an act in a circus? Gives you a whole bunch of ideas. It's just straight up to the point. And then you also have a whole bunch of extra characters back here, 2 different styles. There's these big page sections and then there's small page sections for characters that can be used as leaders of the organizations in which you are a part of, or members of the organization in which you can use as alt characters for just in case your character dies rapidly from something, they can run in and replace your character temporarily, and you could use that character. So there you go. You actually have a nice variety here. Then you have the chapter Life as an Investigator, which basically gets you into, okay, now you are playing Call of Cthulhu. how do you figure out what you're doing in Call of Cthulhu as a player? And this basically gives you advice on splitting up the party. If you're looking for information, what are good sources of information? What should you not do? How to bribe characters? Dangerous situations you might run into, and so forth. And then you also have a chart here of all the, not all, but many of the Mythos entities. And right here you got 2 humans, those 2 little dots right there. Many of these creatures are capable of instantaneously killing any investigator by swatting at them. Which is a good reason why Call of Cthulhu has a reputation for being highly lethal. This is the section on the Roaring 20s. If they look like being weird dipshits, that's normal. Just about every generation looks back at the older generation and looks at them as being all the generations look at each other as being weird dipshits at some point. Young people get looked at by older people for being weird dipshits because old people remember what it's like to be young and being a dumbass. And then young people look at old people thinking you're a dumbass. It's because you don't understand these common concepts that I just literally grew up with and was taught as they were developing. So you got references to movies and transportation and useful information from 1920s investigations like crimes and stuff, forensic printing, ballistics, autopsies, and so forth. Capturing evidence, cameras. You got a section on cars, boats, guns. You got yachts in here, information on yachts, so you can buy a yacht. You got prices for cars and trucks from the 1920s. Airplanes, handguns, rifles, machine guns, fully automatic ones too. And so forth. Yet again, some books based on the 1920s, as well as some movies tossed in here. Famous events, hobbies of people, religion, so forth. Movies from the 1920s. I actually reviewed several of these movies in here. You can actually find them on my other gaming YouTube channel. They're actually somewhat old. And so forth. And then you got Chapter 9, Player Advice, which basically is, yet again, explaining what it is like to play Call of Cthulhu and how to work yourself into the atmosphere of Call of Cthulhu and the various mechanics, how they relate to the setting. And then you got Chapter 10, which is references. You got 100 Years and More, which basically goes over the history of the world and the various events that happened. You got a chart here of speeds and distances for various vehicles and distances from traveling from one place to another. Cars, airplanes, airships, walking, clothing for men, clothing for women, personal care items, food and beverage prices like bacon, sugar cured. You can get bacon for 25 cents a pound. You could buy bacon for 25 cents a pound. Eggs, you can buy a dozen eggs for 13 cents. You can buy aspirin for 10 cents. Buying houses, buying luggage, tents, investigator tools, education. Like, you want to go to college? It only costs you about $275. College costs only $275. But anyways, entertainment prices, lodging, so forth. weapons tables with prices for ammunition as well as the various stats and characteristics of all the weapons, rules on how all those functions or characteristics work. Then you have a conversion section on how to convert from Call of Cthulhu 6th edition and earlier to 7th edition, and how to translate everything. Then you get some maps of Arkham, Massachusetts and Miskatonic County. Index section. You got character sheets. I always have like a ribbon here because I always need to make out some more. You got the 1920s and modern era here. And then we go into basically credits for people who have donated to the Kickstarter for this book, as well as the playtesters information. And throughout this whole section, there's various pieces of artwork from various adventures. That's actually, this image is on the Quick Start book, which is like $19 or something, which is actually really nice. And then you got some advertisements for the various books. Some of these books are being discontinued now, so they're actually going to get really hard to buy. So there you go. Overall, if it wasn't for the fact that there's like these minor annoyances of organization in the book, I had to put my ribbon back where I wanted it. There's like some minor organization issues in the book. Could use some highlighting of characteristics and abilities. Like if you're looking for magic points, it would be nice if the word magic was boldened. Constitution or con would be boldened. Strength would be boldened. Size would be boldened. A few other things should be boldened in the book. It makes it a whole lot easier to spot. Other thing that I wish that would be added is that, what else? Slightly better ribbons, a few more charts, a few other things. It's like I would say this, if made all those changes, this would be a 4.75 book. It would be 4.75. However, without those changes, it's like a 4.25. It's a little annoying to flip between occupations and the stats section for instructions on that stuff, but it's not that big of a deal. It's annoying. Call of Cthulhu is the hardest thing with that is basically just creating characters and then just playing through it and getting over the you might be destroyed in a few seconds if you make the wrong choice kind of feeling. But in reality, Call of Cthulhu is not as brutal as people make it out to be. It's just, you shouldn't play it like Dungeons and Dragons. You should not be the kind of person playing, if you play Call of Cthulhu, you're not trying to min-max your builds like crazy, but there are some builds you can do that are kind of a little on the power-hungry side for Call of Cthulhu. It's just that it's a question of whether your rolls for your stats set you up for that. But anyways, overall, it's an awesome game. It's an awesome book. I would definitely buy it. It's only $49.99. You usually can find it on Amazon for like $39. So there you go. I say it's a 4.25, which on a 5-star scale is pretty darn good. It's just a few things need to be cleaned up and adjusted, and it'll be awesome. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a delightful day, and I say a wonderful weekend, a magnificent month, and see you next time. Ciao.